Hello, I'm Charles Mallett, and this is a UK column interview. I have with me today Sir Julian Rose. Julian has the advantage of wisdom and experience, which comes from having converted his own farm and estate from being one that did use chemicals to augment the agricultural practices into one that didn't and turned it profitable in the process. He has also been kind enough to give a previous interview to UK Column, which went out last year, called Unearthly Interference. Julian, thank you very much indeed for joining me today, and welcome back to UK Column.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. It's always a pleasure to be on for UK Column, of which I'm a great admirer and supporter.
Indeed, you are a tremendous supporter, and that will not be lost on the audience. Now, as I said, we spoke just over, well, no, sorry, just coming up for a year ago, which I hope many of those listening now have tuned into. Fear not if you haven't. This will be absolutely fine to go ahead with as a standalone interview. But if you haven't yet listened to it, I really would encourage you to go back to last April on the UK Column website, ukcolumn.org, and look at Unearthly Influences. But Julian, it's been a bit of a roller coaster since then. Certainly, from a United Kingdom perspective, the relentless push to degrade, destroy, and denude the landscape has continued, apparently unabated. There are many, many details that we could pull out of that, and I dare say we'll touch on some as the interview progresses. But I suppose, as an introductory gambit, how do you review the year that has passed since we last spoke?
The black and the white are becoming more and more apparent, I would say. It's a very extreme time simply because the authors of a centralized totalitarian type of world, I was going to say state, but I'd have to say world, are pushing for a completely materialistic interpretation of what life is. Whereas on the other hand, a red-blooded, warm-hearted element of humanity is beginning to learn that it isn't just our local MPs and governments that are causing problem. It's a much bigger picture, but don't yet understand the full, or don't yet grasp what that full picture is. Into this mix, you get a deliberate, chaotic theme, very easily picked up simply by following any major newspaper. You could say any UK newspaper or anywhere in the world virtually, that journalists can't write proper English. Headlines are completely mad. Stories contradict each other day after day. You certainly start saying to yourself, I think I'm beyond taking seriously anything I'm reading here, but I do take seriously the fact that underneath the mess that one is seeing on the surface, there is a strong undercurrent of pushing for a sort of totalitarian new world order. And the resistance, I believe, is going to come from bottom up. No doubt the main resistance, of course, not entirely, because we have plenty of allies who are emerging in higher places and confronting head on the architects of control. But from the bottom up, you have farmers, workers, foresters, country people, townspeople who are still retaining some sense of morality and cause in life, beginning to come together to form something stronger as a form of resistance movement, which is got to build now and build pretty rapidly, in my view.
I think that's absolutely been the case from the UK column perspective. The UK perspective is that there absolutely are those elements of resistance, if that indeed is the right choice of word, which I think it is. And
Yes.
we do see that there has been a movement towards a lot of the things that you talked about, and the sort of reapplication of the proximity principle, people understanding that to produce food locally on a small scale is something that absolutely does work and does benefit both the land and the customer, and of course the person producing the food in the first place. Now, what we didn't get a chance to talk about previously was what you have been doing and how this bears relation to the projects you're involved with in Poland. And I would really like to draw that out because I think we could all learn a lot from that. Can you just give a background to that and where you are with it now?
The background really to it is that we formed an organization called the International Coalition to Protect the Polish Countryside, ICPPC. And that was with Jadwiga Łopata and myself back in the year 2001. You know, it's extraordinary to think of that. And the objective really of that was the key objective really was to try and support and save the small peasant farming um, uh, world that still exists in Poland, or it certainly did then, while the average size of a farm is around 3 hectares. And a lot of farmers were producing food really for their families and selling a small surplus. But they were under intense pressure by the corporate element and by governments more interested in the world marketplace than looking after their own people. On that note, we decided to establish immediately, I got involved, a campaign to try and stop genetically modified organisms getting into Poland because the word was out that Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer and all those companies, all those corporations, agrochemical and seed corporations were planning to move into Poland and thought it would be a doddle. So we had an extraordinary experience actually, and it was and today it still lives in my mind that I was able, partly through using my title and my background in farming and in management, country estate, etc., to move quite quickly into positions of dialogue with the leaders of the various provinces in Poland. There are 16 of them. And with Jadwiga Łopata, who had already been campaigning strongly before I got involved on this very same issue of protecting and supporting small farmers, we decided to develop a campaign to go straight to regional heads of the provinces rather than go to government and try and stop anything. And this proved a great success because you could say to these people, look, your state has a reputation for wonderful food, for beautiful landscape, for high quality air, and tourism will be a major issue for you in the future if you maintain your standards. People will love that. But there's something coming in which is going to threaten all of it. It's called genetically modified organisms, and that'll sink you completely. I'm just paraphrasing. And we got initially a Podkopacie, which is a state on the eastern side of Poland, to do a voluntary GMO-free zone position, take a voluntary GMO-free zone position. And then we invited them to come to Krakow to speak to the Malpolska authorities, stating that they'd done this. And we pushed very hard on Malpolska to do the same, and it did the same. And then we invited the next state along the line. And so it was on, paraphrasing, that after a year and a half, we had every state in Poland signed up to be a voluntary GMO-free zone, which is an extraordinary thing. And it was largely the work of a very small group of people. I would say 10 people probably. And then we decided to write to the heads of each province, chairman of each province, and demand that they write to the Prime Minister to demand an actual formal ban of the import and planting of genetically modified seeds. And of course, that was the real issue. And 3 months later, that's what happened. He banned it. So in a period of 2 years, we went from nothing to a total ban of genetically modified seeds and plants. That was really the ground base of what has followed since. Since then, we've campaigned largely on issues of legislation to support small farmers rather than put them out of business, of basically issues concerning the poor practice of large-scale farming, destroying food quality and destroying the reputation of Poland for being a country with excellent prawdziwe jedzenie, it's called in Polish, real food. And many other campaigns based on the same issue. Now we're dealing with the latest update on GMO, which is going on, because GMO is constantly being updated and given new names. And it's in the government's basket now. And they are wanting to follow the European Union in taking up this CRISP type uh, legislation, which is trying to pretend that it's not GMO, it's just something to do with altering genes in plants without having to go through the GMO process. So we're working very hard at trying to get the government to recognize this is going to be a disaster. We're working on geoengineering of the atmosphere as well, by the way, chemtrails and common language. We're trying to get the government to understand what's going on there. We have colleagues in Parliament who ask questions in Parliament. And you can imagine the faces of the people when he started asking the question which we gave him. What are you doing about the chemtrails over your state? You know, so, of course, absolute silence and oh no, no, there isn't anything like that. No, no, no. We're beavering away on that one. And more evidence is emerging, which might mean that we do get a handle on it. One of the main reasons is that the research and testing, particularly that's done, there is some done on the quality of water, etc., to see what contaminants are in there, doesn't go down to a low enough level of microns to even pick up what's coming down in aluminium, barium, strontium, etc., in the form of chemtrails. So they're actually testing above the limit where you'd see the actual result. And I'm beginning to discover that there is information in the scientific domain to say you have to get into very, very small micro elements in order to see it. And if we can force this on the government, maybe we'll even make some progress there. But that's just a basic basket of stuff we do. We tackle almost anything that looks like it's going to cause a major upset to the traditional way of life of the agricultural countryside community.
From which there's so much talk about and so much crossover with well, what will be going on in a lot of the rest of Europe, if not the rest of the world. I mean, we've got the sort of genetic side of it. In fact, the United Kingdom has just announced that there'll be a statutory instrument, secondary legislation to augment the Gene Editing Act, the Precision Breeding Act, they called it, meaning that will get the go-ahead in spring of this year. And I mean, would I be right in thinking that when we talk about gene editing, this is really just sort of altering the language, but not necessarily
Oh,
specifically the
definitely. I mean,
practices?
this is how they do everything, of course. They start off with something which is reasonably clear. Of course, it's still very scientific jargon orientated. It's reasonably clear. And when there's resistance and successful resistance to that, which there has been in Europe, after all, highly successful resistance against genetically modified food being grown in Europe, a tiny percentage only is grown, mostly in Spain. But if they see that doesn't work, they subtly alter they alter the language and they do a little bit of tinkering in the laboratories and they say, we've come up with something which is no longer a threat. And of course, you hear this type of stuff, but if you think about who's saying it, you realize that everything they're doing is a threat. The people behind all these things are going the opposite direction from people interested in ecology and small scale and medium scale farms and human lifestyle, if like they're all going on the big corporate bandwagon machine. So you can tell before they've even opened their mouths, don't trust a word of it. It is so clear now. And since we did the last interview, I'd say it's become increasingly clear that the people running individual countries and people running government and the people who go to the WEF, the World Economic Forum, Davos meetings to plan, or not necessarily even to plan, but to discuss how to put into effect the next phase of development of the shift towards an agenda which makes human beings considerably less human by plugging them into computers and making them into beings who are no longer really expected to use their brains. In fact, I would say that it's become a sort of smartphone ideal. You don't have to think. a machine will do it for you. Therefore, your corpuscles, your brain corpuscles, get slacker and slacker and slacker, and you just follow the information coming through, the digital information coming through EMF, and that's what they want. That they can subtly and psychologically work on people so that they take less and less and less interest in the reality of the life that is going on around them. And this is the great danger to me. This is the biggest danger of this time.
I think that's exactly right. It's the utter inability of people to grasp what is going on around them, and in large part, as you mentioned last time, the dulling of the senses and the dulling of the mind and the ability to critically think by absorption in what we are told are technological innovations for our benefit. But it seems that
Yes.
the obverse is absolutely the case, which brings us on to something that has certainly in public discourse become an absolutely ever-present topic, which is artificial intelligence and how that now is being pushed out into farmers. And I think we sort of go back to what people do or don't know. I mean, we'll come on to the dangers of artificial intelligence, but how do you perceive the knowledge base of, say, the agricultural community, the wider community? I mean, do you think people actually even understand what AI is?
Well, no, they don't understand really what AI is, but they feel it's alien, you know. They sense that it's alien, just like the words genetically modified food. You may not actually understand what it is, but that's an alien sounding thing. So AI, artificial intelligence, sounds alien, especially when you use artificial intelligence. AI, the acronym, unfortunately, doesn't tell you very much. Just like net zero doesn't tell you anything, but it has a massive meaning underneath it. So people don't really get it. And now one of the reasons for this is that they're addicted to their own mobile phones, cell phones, smartphones, iPods, God knows what else. They're addicted to them. They can't imagine giving them up. Only a tiny percentage of the population can imagine that. It's a crisis for the imagination. In other words, they've been had by the AI propaganda machine that you can't live without your mobile phone. And of course, up to a point, some people, farmers, would be a very good case in point for people that would benefit from some sort of technology like this. You're out in the fields, your tractor breaks down, you've got to call someone up to come, to mend it, or you've got some crisis over there with your sheep and whatever it is, you have need of something like a walkie-talkie or a phone to actually cover the ground rather than have to go all the way back to your home and pick up your telephone. But for almost every other working element of the population, apart from the fire service, the police, and one or two other emergency people, this is a convenience tool which is taken over. And the farming community don't see that the plan, well, actually, we have to string this. We probably did it last time, but I'll have to say it again because it's at the bottom of all this. The plan to try and reach net zero by 2045 is underlining everything. So every excuse used by government for why it has to introduce more and more draconian measures, why cows have to be given masks because they give off methane, and why there's some new animal feed, I think, coming out, which is supposed to have an ingredient in it which prevents methane being formed in cows that have two stomachs and specifically make methane for good reasons, no doubt. That all of this, and actually ultimately the production of milk, meat, and virtually and many other products artificially created in factories to replace actual meat, actual milk, therefore also the livestock. The livestock are going to go. And this is the plan, this is what's really difficult for people to grasp. It's an overall plan. It was made a long time ago. Actually, it was made back in 1972 at the Club of Rome. And the Bilderbergers meet every year and discuss how to further approach this. This plan was made back then, and it's being followed. Okay, it doesn't always work out on time, but they're very persistent. And the target is to get uh, the existing and traditional human and humanitarian way of life out of the way and replace it with completely alien form of absolute materialism and control. This is the control system, and this is what people can't get. They must get it. It's absolutely vital that people get it. You can do research these days, plenty on the internet if you find the right sources, including UK Column, obviously, to go into depth about the steps being taken and why they're being taken, and how the idea of the annulment of carbon dioxide is insanity, because carbon dioxide is what feeds plants that give off oxygen that enable us to breathe. So they're actually saying, if you take them verbatim, they're saying we are going to ban carbon dioxide on the planet, which means the end of the planet, on the plant kingdom and everything else. That is what they're actually saying. Net zero CO2 by 2045. So if you work back from there, you'll see that everything, including the latest attempt to, well, not even an attempt, the latest legislation to attack farmers on the taxation side, inheritance tax side, which are going to force a number of farmers, traditional farmers, particularly long-standing farmers on some medium-sized and larger farms, out. No generation to take that on because it'll be taxed out of existence. But the reason for all this is to get to net zero by 2045. And it's a scandal on the level which is capital S, and it's not easy for people to grasp it.
You strike absolutely upon it, which is that people are simply not grasping it, and they are wooed by the idea that it is making life more convenient or
Yes,
more easy or more secure, or any of these phrases that we hear
yes.
constantly chirped at us. Now, you've just mentioned the inheritance tax, the APR, Agricultural Property Relief, which began in only back in 1992. And it is interesting that you should mention it, because it seems that, if one was being cynical, and I think this might be the right forum for expressing such cynicism, in the United Kingdom, it has been seized upon not just by the mainstream media, but by and large by the sort of the broader farming community, and the effect of that has been that it has drawn attention away from all the sorts of things that you have been talking about, like the pursuit of net zero based on absolutely nothing, and the suggestion, therefore, in the face of what they perceive to be an existential threat via taxing at the point of inheritance, has pushed people into accepting the idea that they could diversify into cutting down trees and putting up solar panels or wind turbines or whatever it may be. So
Yeah.
it seems that yet again we see this manipulation of events and language in order to distract people. But my question, when eventually I get there, is really concerning money, because people are ill disposed to spend money where they consider that they shouldn't be spending it. I mean, do you have any sense that we might be approaching a point where people just say, okay, enough's enough, it's just costing too much to do this, that, and the other?
Well, what would be if they said that? If they said that it's costing too much to do this, that, and the other, what would they do as a next step? I mean, I definitely do understand and follow the logic of the fact that there has been, in the traditional sense of a capitalist free market, democratic approach to management, which is followed by countries like England. There is this idea that every year or so, life should get better from the point of view of you should have a slightly better income. You should have the possibility of slightly more freedom to do such and such a thing you want to do, travel, whatever it might be, that it's supposed to incrementally get better. Occasionally to stagnate is perhaps acceptable. But it seems to me that there's been 4 or 5 years, of course, this is COVID came into the middle of all this too, of very little progress on that traditional view of what is supposed to be the good life. It's not my view. I'm much more basic. You know, I don't consider this the right way to run a country at all. Because again, it's entirely lost on any values based on spiritual aspiration, creativity being the basis for change, people feeling expressed in their pursuits, in their professions, rather than being feeling like slaves in those positions. So, I mean, I don't go with that particular uh, trend of believing everything should get better through increased production, you know, the old famous economic scenario of the great economists of the past, but Adam Smith and all of them. So people do, though, and that's why your question comes up. What would that lead to if they decide they've had enough of struggling with all these things? I don't know. You know, you'll get someone like Nigel Farage jumping in there probably and managing to make a political issue out of it. And then they'll probably elect him. But of course, he won't do any more because actually, all the leadership element is tied together in this club, which is really run from the World Economic Forum, from Klaus Schwab's uh, palace, if you like, up there, because the planning for the future of the planet has already been done. It's just being executed in various stages. So they do something harsh and then they leave a gap for you to start feeling better about it again and think, oh, well, it wasn't so bad after all. And then they bring in another harsh motivation. So bit by bit, they wear people down. This is all part of the plan. It's a psychologically well-known plan to do this. So what will people ultimately decide? And it used to be called revolution. But I can't see a country like England being involved in a revolution. What I can see them being involved in is what I call a strong resistance movement. But this requires a uniting on various fronts. And you're beginning to see this on the level of the consumer starting to support the farmer because they see the farmer. The farmer's got rather good press, I noticed in England, because of this inheritance tax issue. And consumers are on the side of farmers on the whole, at least the sort of consumers that know something about food, which is not the urban part, but it's the ones maybe who have second homes in the countryside start learning about decent food, and so on and so forth. So the potential for uniting is going to have to come out with a new vision of the future, which has got nothing to do with capitalist or socialist or any other political quasi-democratic movement. It has to be universal. It has to be an ideal which is universal. It's an ideal for all humanity. All humanity needs basic housing, health, clothing, medicine, and care. You know, you have to go to that and say, well, that's the starting point now. You got to go back to that and find a way that what wealth is left is distributed evenly amongst people in a crisis situation. And then you have to go from there into saying, well, what's the goal now? What direction are we going in? And the direction we were going in from there is to bring out the qualities in people which are completely stifled by the status quo. And I'm talking about education, number one. Education, the Latin word is educare, which means to lead out from. Very interesting, actually, which means to bring out the creativity in people, not push into, according to a sort of factory examination system, which it is today. It's just another fact, it's just another corporation. And every single area of profession has to be worked, reviewed, and reestablished on the fundamental basis that humanity is in danger of losing its essential meaning. I think it's as big as that, Charles. Humanity is in danger of losing its essential meaning. Human, godly, warm, loving, spontaneous, joyous, all that has to be back in the picture again. And that's the aim of a universal and, of course, support No, none of this division of sex and color and money, culture, religion, all that has to be seen to be phony, which it is. And at the bottom, for instance, of all the main religions on the planet, there were prophets, very, very real prophets who saw that wisdom, truth, and love and compassion are shared by all religions at the very bottom point. But it's been completely clouded over. No religion knows what it's doing anymore. You don't even get clergy or the Pope or archbishops or anyone coming out and standing against destruction and death in Gaza or in Ukraine, or the behavior of their own politicians, the paedophilia. They don't even come out to cry it down. They're all part of the same club. I'm sorry to be so extreme for the audience. I hope you understand me. I'm feeling we're in a crisis and we need to have a major rethink about the future.
I don't think you're being too extreme at all. And I think people need to know where you perceive that they are, and from there we work forward. I will just quote to the audience from an article that you've published very recently, which relates exactly to this concept of resistance, and I think people will be very interested to hear. I will, of course, post a link to the article in the notes for this interview. But you wrote, somewhere in Old England there exists a moral spine, a form of common sense supported resistance to faceless modernity, repudiation of change for change's sake, and the brainless rush into a brave new world order. That stubborn characteristic of English culture is now needed on the front line of defence against the psychopathic pursuit of a digitally deemed necessity for becoming a global leader of change within an already top-down induced programme of chaos and confusion.
Oh, wow.
Those words are very powerful, and I think they absolutely deserve rereading and listening to again. They talk to me, they are suggestive in terms of the sort of psychopathic element of this, that the march of the so-called philanthropist into this area. We've seen under the term of regenerative agriculture, we've seen people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon and Bill Gates of absolutely everything coming into this area. Now, going back to the beginning, when you were describing how you dealt with the regional administrations in Poland, yes. How do you feel that these sorts of people who are effectively deep state controllers, how can they be managed?
My God, that's a good one. How can they be managed? Well, I don't know the answer to this. It's a very good question. I feel I don't have the answer how they can be managed, because unfortunately they are the management. So, it's like saying to someone who's an employee, how do you manage your boss? But what they are doing, which is, I think, helpful, and I was talking about universality, I think it's helpful in a universal picture that there are people representing the demonic element who are forcing into the foreground the darkest possible scenario. Well, the darkness brings out in people, like in a war, when your back's up against a wall, the darkness brings out of people the necessity of producing light to counteract it. And I see them having this role. I mean, I believe that probably, the supreme consciousness, it knows exactly why these people are being allowed to fulfill at least a degree of their ambitions of super materialist, quasi-robotic people, because they are shocking, or should be shocking, people who are still human into recognizing the depths of the disparity between the dark and the white. And once you feel this, just as in a war or in a crisis, you have to react. You keep pushing it to the side, saying, oh, no, it can't be as bad as that. This is the biggest burden we have in dealing with people today. Oh, it can't be as bad as that. This is a crisis of the imagination. If you see a horror film, you see a horror film, you think, oh God, but if you think that life's turned into a horror film or something similar to a horror film, it gives you a terrible shock. You thought it was a film. You thought it was something on Netflix. You didn't think it was real in actual life, but it is, and it's closing in on us, and therefore it will be, I think, in I can't talk about time because I have no idea how long this is going to take, but it will cause some element of positivity and very powerful positivity to rise up. And those people who are the sort of billionaire class of Musk, Bezos, and Trump, and all these others, billionaire leadership of the world, it will floor them because they can't think that way. To them, to psychopaths, and most of them are, or very close to being, human beings are strange. They have emotions. Emotions are weird. They don't want emotions. Emotions get in the way, after all, of getting to the goal you want to get to. You shouldn't have emotions. Strip emotions out of the human body. Alter the DNA of human beings so they can't feel emotion. Attack the neocortex at the level using EMF, lodge ideas into their brains without them even knowing it. That's the control system that's working on the planet and people right now. And this is why I'm going through this all again, because people must grasp the level of intensity of this. It's real. Therefore, it should bring out in us a very courageous, what I like to call spiritual warrior type feeling. Oh no, not while I'm alive on this planet. These people won't get away with it. No way. That's what I
Quite,
think.
quite right. Absolutely right. Now, when we last spoke, you described very well, very eloquently, and of course, with your own personal insight due to your relationship with the Soil Association, but also the process of converting hardwick to organic. What you described was the subversion of a genuine organic movement by the greed that allowed people to think that dealing with supermarkets and with the big food corporations was the right way to go, when patently, even at the time, it was not. Today, we've sort of moved beyond that period. There is, of course, still the issue of things being labelled differently in order to apparently attract the buyer and attract a premium. But what is it that you see now as being I suppose, the equivalent process to that back there? As in, what will subvert those who are genuinely trying to farm in the right way and deal with the consumer in the right way now? Where are they going to get drawn off to if the
Yes.
controlling entities have their way?
Well, yes, this is a very good question. Um, the the temptations that catch people are nearly always associated with economy in the end. It's the bottom line. So, you are faced by something which makes you suddenly realize, oh my God, I'm on the edge of bankruptcy, or my family, or my whole life, my world, I'm going to take my own life. And I gather in England every fortnight someone does in the farming profession, tragically. Um, uh, or you say, okay, I'll have to adapt to survive. I'll have to adapt to survive. I can hear this little voice getting thinner and thinner. I'll have to adapt to survive. I'll have to adapt to survive. And this adaptation to survive plays into the camp that we've just been describing. That's what they want everyone to do, adapt to survive. So the movement for a sort of positive way forward for people in agriculture who are working on small and medium-sized pro-ecological farms and cooperating with consumers and following this proximity principle type of approach are rare phenomena, but they are there. There's quite a few of them out there. The first question I suppose one would have to say is, I always say to people, come on, get back to the land if you're reasonably able individual. Start growing your own food, etc., etc., etc. So it goes on. Get together in the local village to produce local energy. Don't buy off the grid from and going to be some mini scale nuclear reactors now dumped on the British public, I understand, in order to produce enough power to run the new AI. Oh, yes, I think they're going to be interesting by that one. You know, the NIMBYs, not in my backyard. How are they going to like this? Oh, by the way, Mrs. X, there's going to be a nuclear reactor in the field next to you. I hope you don't mind. Ha ha. And this is where the British are at their best. No way. No. Oh, no, they won't have it. No way. That's never going to happen. Can't happen in England. It's too crowded an island. But subverting the existence of existing smaller scale, medium scale farmers producing real food is going to be the target. You know, they're going to be targeted if they're seen to resist successfully. And the question is, I'd rather put it the other way around. How are they going to defend themselves? I wonder how they're going to defend themselves. Now, here in Poland, the same discussion takes place about how they're going to defend themselves, how people are going to defend themselves. And quite a lot of people are looking at it from a sort of military perspective. People are training themselves to use guns. You know, they're prepared to kill, basically. I don't know. This might happen in England, but the gun laws have become extremely draconian. I used to have 3 guns, and because I'm living overseas so much, I've had to let them all go. I don't have a gun anymore in England because the forms you have to fill in, the photographs you have to have taken, a number of signatures you have to have on the back of the photograph. It's absolutely impossible. And the number of bullets you used during the year or didn't use them. And no, I only used the gun very, very occasionally. I've become rather against killing animals altogether in my older age. But I recognize that resistance always in the past has meant having the ability to defend yourself. And how else are they going to defend themselves, these small people? Well, the best way would be by making the local public to where you're farming dependent, in a positive sense, dependent on the produce you're producing. In other words, their livelihood. What will prevent them starving? What will give them recourse to good health, a good feeling, you know, neighborliness, is the fact that they decide, these public will decide, yes, this is the source of my livelihood for the future. I must support this little jewel which exists in this very dark sea around it. And I see this happening almost like arcs, like Noah's arcs, dotted around country in England and gradually connecting up with each other. And so it becomes something of a consumer and farmer together form of resistance. I noted, by the way, over the years, that it seems likely that organic farms will be less targeted by the dark side than non-organic, because the dark side want to have organic food in their lives. They live on organic food too, you know. They'll only buy organic. They don't want to lose that. So they may preserve organic farms for their own sake.
Yes, I remember you mentioning, you said that the House of Commons used to provide
Yes,
only organic food when in your days
that's
advising
it.
in
They did.
Parliament.
They may
Yeah.
still do. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, but no, I mean, you know, isn't it extraordinary when one considers the notion of progress that we can be having a conversation in which defending oneself with a firearm of some sort might be a possibility in the year
Yes, it is
2025. I mean,
extraordinary.
that is totally bizarre, and also again, really worth considering that resistance is as simple as doing those things that they do not want you to do. And this is why I asked you about the organic movement and the supermarkets. It's something as simple as not shopping at a supermarket. You talked about
Precisely.
that, you know, very, very clearly lost. And actually,
Yes.
again, on the power front, funnily enough, there is a power cut where I am today, but I have an off-grid set up
Wow.
specifically for this
Fantastic.
reason, so I'm not affected by it.
Brilliant.
But you're absolutely right that this relentless push to artificial intelligence is to tell us that it will tell us what to do,
Yes.
and we are to surrender our access to electricity in order that it may work and we may not. But
Yes.
specifically, to come back to AI and farming, what what sort of words of caution? Because I mean, people listening to this will be rubbing shoulders with all sorts of farmers, people in the food industry, whatever. I mean, what sort of warnings against specifically, say, AI and the transhumanistic elements would you have?
I would say just study your own behavior pattern, become much more conscious of the sort of decisions you're making. Are you stopping long enough and meditating on major issues in your life, or even not major issues in your life? Or are you on a sort of automatic where you're in too much of a hurry to be able to stop to think? You know, people have to do this now because we are being led by the nose and we're running, rushing. Oh God, I got to get that done, that done, that done, that done. And there's no time to really sit and think things through, which requires time, requires a calm state of mind, and it requires a deeper observation of the direction which life's going in, and then acting on that observation. So the tool, I mean, I agree with you. I've thought many times that if one could convince the public not to shop in supermarkets, and if you could convince the public not to buy their electricity from the main supplier, if you could persuade more people to go off grid, or if you could do all these ifs, I think I've pretty much decided that too many people are too hooked, particularly supermarket. Although I do believe between 10 and 15% of the population quite regularly shop in farm shops in England. That's a statistic going back rather a long way, but I don't know what the figure would be now. It's quite encouraging that people, you know, some instinct in people is telling them, no, I like, you know, I think the food's going to be better quality and more real and possibly even local and maybe even ecological. And actually, I want to support other farmers. So I'm going to shop that way and not shop on the global network of mass production and destruction of the planet and people and animals and everything else. That it's absolutely night and day when people can stop long enough and think about it. It's absolutely other. So if you are controlled by convenience, really have a good think about this. If you find out that you are, then really give yourself a strong kick in the butt and say, so I'm not going to go on this way. I'm going to support real, real, real. And that way, I'll be part of a resistance movement, which thousands and thousands of others will be part of. And eventually, we will be the people who run the country. You know, it'll be a bottom-up takeover. They will eventually run because the chaos gets worse and worse. Everything becomes chaotic. You have to have a group of people with leadership qualities, with stubbornness, with their feet on the ground, with knowledge and skills in manual industries. And those people will become absolutely vital to the future.
I think the evaluation of convenience and the part it plays in your life is essential, but of course, a huge misperception to consider that the opposite of convenience might be inconvenience when it's not. It is that you are engaging in things and thoughts that you would otherwise be missing out on. I think that's the way that people should view it. Now, I want to come back to your experiences and your insights because I think the other bit that's missing from people's consciousness is the idea that any of these activities that we're describing as perhaps the alternative to the mainstream can be profitable, and you demonstrated that with on the organic side of it, but also in terms of the parceling up of land and the engagement with local communities. That was something you were very particular to talk about last time. So somebody who's perhaps got a medium to large sized farm could be letting out parcels of it to people looking to get on what you call the farming ladder, younger people. Now that you could say, well, there's a massive gap, for example, in the slaughtering of animals. The abattoirs are decreasing on a daily basis in the UK. There is a real problem, especially for the smaller producer who have nowhere to take it. My question is, are you aware in terms of education of any sort of bodies or educators who are informing younger people that these options even exist, or has that is that just a sort of closed door now?
Which options are you referring to? I lost
Well,
you.
the idea that people going into farming and agriculture now could be looking at
This
doing
exist.
things in the way that you describe, rather than just going and joining Cargill or Tesco or whatever.
Yes, well, I'm doing it on my on Hardwick estate. I know of a group of people who are starting off on a very, very large scale attempt to buy farms and do exactly as you described with them, parcel them up into small sections and allow people to come in and run them. And each of these farms would have a farm shop and would have the ability to sell the produce, as well as all the other accoutrements that go with artisan craftsmanship, etc. There is a project underway. I can't really talk about it much because it's, although I'm an advisor to these people, it's not established enough to be able to make it really public in terms of naming it. But it's a very brave, courageous attempt to go forward by people who are not farmers really, but they have deep sympathy for this approach. They recognize that people need to, for their own health, that need to have their feet on the ground and be in nature. I know, this is another absolutely critical element that everybody needs to have their feet on the ground and be in touch with nature, and ideally be working with those forces. Um, at Hardwick, for example, I've now got, I think it's 7 small businesses, with each related to agriculture, but not directly related to agriculture, which are helping to make that community more and more self-sufficient in more and more areas. So, you don't have to specifically state only food. Anything that contributes to the overall sense of making a prosperous, interconnected, working community of people who are doing this in a pro-ecological spirit. In other words, it has to have that aim of being good for the planet and not bad for the planet. If you have various sorts of businesses coming together on an area of land and being occupied with that, those people mix and meet each other and they find they have rather a similar outlook. And that's better than trying to create a community where you put people deliberately in place and say to them, now you've got to work together and, follow the following ideal. Let them get on the land. Someone needs to be in the background who has a bit of a vision and some leadership quality to help steer the course of such a thing, but give them the opportunity to develop their craftsmanship, their artisanship, their mechanical skills, their engineering skills, their growing skills, their educational skills, their drama skills. Why not have theatre in there as well? And let that community become the basis of the future. And now, if that could be reproduced many times all over the land, we would have the beginning of something that would present a very different picture of the future, much more positive, optimistic, and real feeling sense of it.
Well, I mean, what you mentioned there, without giving away details. Obviously, I understand sensitivity if it's at an early stage, but that sounds like a terrifically exciting project. And if it is one that can be replicated, then I would absolutely love to follow up with you about
Good.
that
Well,
and
they'd be more
to
than
hear more
pleased.
about it.
I think
And I
it'll be
want,
about
without sort of
50.
giving the game away, have they in the organisation of that, the establishment of it so far? Has there been any trickery, any I don't know, regulatory issues raised, or do there appear to be obstacles? Because of course, what you've described is very much going against the prevailing narrative. Are there already obstacles in the path?
Yeah, well, I'm not at the core team of this. I've been asked to be an advisor, and so far I've only had one session with them. But I said, be planning, watch out for this. How are you going to get planning permission for establishing the right sort of infrastructure to make it possible for you? I think when people are working the land, they need to live pretty much on it or very close by. Otherwise, it loses its significance, really. So you'd have to have the ability, the possibility for people to live where they work. In a pretty simple way. I think it should be rudimentary, but comfortable. The planning authorities in England make life extremely difficult for people having this aspiration. But everything changes, and you can't be sure. And a completely different government or a completely different sense of purpose might free up the planning regulations in the UK to be more creative, to give youth a chance to try and stop unemployment by giving people the option of becoming self-employed and developing their own skills and earning their own living, etc. So it's all to do really with the intensity of pressure in those directions that makes the difference, I've noticed. If the intensity of pressure in a certain direction starts making leadership unpopular because it's not getting on with it, they start thinking, oh dear, we may not be around for the next election and might we lose my role as an MP. And then they start thinking, we'd better get with the popular side if we want to stay in power. So we've got to make this type of vision popular. And then they will start taking it seriously, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we sort of draw towards a close, I think the most important message, what you speak about covers a enormous breadth of subject matter, but what we come back to is that what you eat and where it comes from. So the food and the soil are the most important things in your life because it is they that give you the type of existence that you have insofar as they dictate entirely your health and your state of mind. So as we sort of look forward from that point, I suppose I would like to know what, as we cast our eye over 2025 lying ahead of us, what do you think you'd like to encourage people to do this year that relates both to food and the soil, but deals with all the all the other somewhat depressing issues that, of course, are just there?
One has to do two things in life. I'm talking philosophically for a moment. One has to do two things. And I'm saying absolutely have to. You have to go into yourself as a human being and to use a spiritual term, meditate. You have to consider your inner value. What are you here on this planet for? What's the objective? It's a pretty short time scale in terms of universal time. How are you going to make this life really mean something positive? And then you have to go in the outside world and put into effect what comes out of that process of consideration and meditation. That's absolutely the bottom line. You've got to do both. If you do one or the other, it doesn't work. You either become egotistical or you become charitable or something, but you can't, you have to do both. You have to go inwards, clear out the stuff that's preventing you flourishing as a spark of the supreme consciousness, which you are, and then get out into the world and use that power to bring change. That's absolutely fundamental. Now, what in the text, in the context of a healthy, positive, meaningful life, there is nothing to beat farming. There's nothing to beat it. I mean, I've been a farmer now for 30 or 40 odd years, and everything I did before has to be rethought of in context of being part of that now. It's not like farming, oh, something on the side. Oh, yeah, people might want to do that, hard work, miserable weather. God, I wouldn't want to know. You've got to make the farming, the production of food, clothing, shelter, fiber from trees, forestry. That's got to be the foundation upon which you build what I said earlier. So I think people have simply got to realize what they're missing by not having an involvement, however small a scale. I think people should start with, 7 by 7 square yard back garden in a suburb. You should start there, for God's sake. You will amaze yourself. And there's plenty of people who've written very good books and stories about this sort of thing. You will amaze yourself by the pleasure you get from seeing the results of your hard work. And yet not only seeing, eating. you know, and there is nothing that can replace that. And the hydroponic and genetically modified food and whatever you name it is just never going to replace that. So angle your lives to make a priority of if you can't, for some reason, do it yourself or start to do it yourself, then support those who are. Could be a farm shop, could be a box scheme, it could be any number of different little initiatives that are taking place. Support that and find a connection with the people involved with that. And that's also the beginning of the growth of this new community we're discussing. But make the love of the soil, the love of the plant life, of bird life, of biodiversity, of nature, absolutely central to your vision of the future.
Julian, as always, you leave the audience on a very positive note and with plenty to go away and think about. Now, I know that you don't dabble in social media, for which you are to be given much credit, but you do have a couple of websites, I think, that I can point people towards. And of course, there will be notes for this below the interview. So, where would you like to direct people to find out a bit more about what you're thinking and writing?
Well, really, I just have my own website, really, which is www.julianrose.info, all lowercase, of course. It's quite a well maintained. It's maintained by people in Poland who are doing a very good job with it, I think. It's quite simple and easy to understand, look at. And you have in there also the possibility of contacting me if you want to do it as a under, I think it says under reviews, reviews of my books or whatever it is. There is something saying contact the author. You know, I am the author of 4 books as well, and Overcoming the Robotic Mind is the one which is closest to the issues we've been discussing today. But the small publishing company that produced that book in Bulgaria has just gone out of business, unfortunately. And so it's without a home, that book now. But I can always post it to people or ask my office in England to post it to people. So have a look at that. And it's all the material in it. And my other 2 books, Creative Solutions to a World in Crisis and In Defense of Life. It's the material that we've been discussing today is very much at the heart of those 3 books.
Great, thank you very much. And details will be posted alongside other notes for the interview at ukcolumn.org. So please make sure you share this far and wide. And if you're not already doing so, but you are in a position to support UK Column financially to help us bring interviews such as this to you, then please go to ukcolumn.org and consider either donating or joining as a member. Now, it remains for me only to thank Julian very, very much indeed for an absolutely fascinating interview. It's been terrific, Julian. Thanks so much, and do keep in touch.
Well, thank you, Charles. And as I said before, I'm delighted to be involved in talking with you on UK Column, and may we all go forward as a united brother and sisterhood into the rosy sun rising future that we see ahead of us.